Hello and welcome. This is Lights Out and away we go with the episode. With the Formula 1 podcast for fans and by fans. I'm Will, and as I look across the digital garage, as always, I'm joined by my co-driver, should I say my co-host Sam. Hello Sam, how are you? I should say
Hello,
also,
Will.
happy birthday for the weekend. Did you have a good day?
I did, thank you very much. Yeah, it was very nice. Spent the day looking at British animals with my daughter. It was good fun, yeah, and then spent the rest of the day pretty much just eating my body weight in all kinds of stuff. So I feel like I've put on a lot of weight this weekend. So I'm now looking at the next month as a kind of, right, that was fun. Now let's not do that again for a while. But yeah, that was a very nice day. Thank you. How are you?
I'm all good, thank you. I had a very nice, relaxing weekend. So yeah, very chilled out. So it's all good. It's all good. And I should say, as we teased in our episode last week, we're delighted today to be joined by a special guest. We're joined by Alasdair Hooper, duty editor at Formula 1. Hello, Alasdair. Welcome. How are you?
Hello, guys. Yeah, very good, thank you. Very good, and delighted to spend a nice Monday evening with you guys. And happy birthday, Sam, as well. I know I didn't have a chance to say that before we started recording, but I'll chuck in the birthday congratulations there too.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much for joining us. And I can imagine this is a busy time of year for you, previewing, getting ready for the upcoming season. And I can imagine more so with Lewis moving to Ferrari, sort of coming out of the blue. How's the last couple of weeks been in preparation for the new season?
In a word, manic. The last couple of weeks, car launch season is usually pretty hectic anyway. When you've got interviews, the releases of the new cars, you name it, lots of content to go on. And that was without the Lewis Hamilton move to Ferrari that decided to pop up a couple of weeks ago. But one of those stories that you love being a part of because everyone's talking about it. We as fans, even though we work for F1, we're predominantly all fans as well. And it's just got absolutely everyone excited. And I think it's just kind of ignited the start of the season before the season's actually properly got going yet. And that's great to have, quite frankly. And I'm really excited for seeing how 2025 pans out in the Hamilton world anyway. Even this year too, but it's just gotten everyone buzzing for what's to come.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how you sort of feeling for the 2024 season?
Good, I think. Like I say, it feels like everything's ramping up, but it also feels like, obviously because I work on the editorial journalism side of things, there feels like there's a lot more stories and narratives and plot lines, if you like, that are kicking into gear for this year. A lot of with 2025 in mind. If you look at that driver market, the driver market chat is very hot right now. Yeah. But yeah, we're just excited to see how it pans out and following those storylines from start to finish, I suppose.
Yeah, I can imagine silly season's going to be the whole season, really, with so many transfers of drivers and so many contracts up at the end of the season.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I say the chat has already started now, looking ahead to 2025. So just think of what is to come as the year goes on.
Yeah. And before we discuss the 2024 season, we should ask you, what's it like working for Formula 1?
I mean, I love it. I joined midway through last season. It was April last year. I actually joined Formula 1 themselves. Before that, I used to work for the Mirror on the catchily titled non-football sports team that they had, where I was a content editor there, covering, surprise, every sport apart from football, of which F1 obviously formed quite a large basis of that and what we did. And it's been great coming into, I suppose, F1 itself and solely dedicating my time to it, partly because I really enjoy the sport, but it's helped get my creativity going. And there's just so many brilliant opportunities that you get working within the organization. And it might sound a little wishy-washy, but there's a lot of talented people who work there, be it the editorial minds, be it the technical minds. And it's just really nice to see a lot of people who are really good at what they do, but just care a lot as well about it. You know, when people care about the same things that you do and just trying to deliver something that everybody can enjoy at the same time, that's very refreshing. So it's been great. And I suppose I'm coming up to a year within the organization, but it's been a year that's flown by.
Oh, very good. I mean, I feel like as a fan, it must feel like, sometimes it must not feel like work when you're getting to cover the sport, you love and you follow as closely as well. So
exactly. When you're working on the Lewis Hamilton story and you're coming up to about 15, 16 hours on shift and you're still going, you know something must be right.
living the dream. So let's come on to the 2024 season. We're going to preview every team between the three of us. We've had quite a few of the car launches already, but we've not seen many of the actual cars. We've seen some lovely black liveries with a few bit of paint on them, and we've seen a lot of rendering as well. But we thought we'd go through every team between us and sort of preview their 2024. So we're going to go through it in constructor order from how they finished last year. So we're obviously going to start with the world champions. So Alasdair, Red Bull, last year was a very successful year for them. What does 2024 hold for Red Bull?
Yeah, very successful, I think, is putting it a bit mildly on what they managed to achieve last year. And obviously kicking off one of the teams that haven't launched yet. But I think we can already say they are the favourites going into 2024, considering how last year panned out in what was pretty much bar one race as perfect as you can be for a team. And the fact that they were able to put so much time and resource into this year's car so early, I think is going to put them in a great position going into 2024. I don't think it's going to be as dominant as last year. I think there's going to be, third year now of the regulations, and I think you are going to see a bit of that closing up of the rest of the pack. So don't expect them to win 23 out of 24 races this year. Fingers crossed not, anyway. But I think a lot of that narrative as well is going to be the driver pairing and how that pans out. Obviously, the inevitable will Max Verstappen go on to take that fourth title. Definitely he's the favourite to do that. But also the Perez question, when you consider how last year panned out, and 4 races in, we were thinking it's 2 race wins each. How's this going to pan out? It actually looked like a conceivable title battle between the pair of them. And then what happened obviously happened in terms of Perez and his qualifying and everything assorted with that. So he's a man with pressure on him. So it's not all about Verstappen. There's going to be a lot of eyes on that seat. And we've already mentioned about the driver market being hot. He is one of those names in those conversations as well, and people will be eyeing up that spot potentially for the future. It's his to lose, but I think there's a lot of interesting narratives at Red Bull, and like I say, favourites to go on and win the championship again, Constructors' Championship, and I think Verstappen too for the drivers' title, but it's going to be a lot closer, and I'm interested to see who's really up for that challenge elsewhere, team-wise.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think Perez will have a better 2024 than he did last year?
Yes, I think so. Partly because I think he's very aware of it and aware that the performances need to step up. And I think he's actively said as well that, he's been seeing sports psychologists, trying to really get the mindset right, if you like. And we did a piece this week, personal plug for F1.com, which hopefully a lot of your readers or your listeners do read every now and again. But we kind of contrasted what Nico Rosberg did when he finally overcame and beat Hamilton that season. And could Perez take anything from that? And a lot of it was just the mental side, actually getting to sleep properly, getting that mindset in the best place it could possibly be. So I think Perez is very aware that it's kind of a now or never situation for him to really perform and take it to Max Verstappen. He wants to challenge for a title, is very much his goal. So I think that pressure, in a good way, will kind of tell. But whether he can actually deliver that consistency versus someone like Max Verstappen, that's the question, because the guy is superhuman in terms of what he can do consistency-wise. We all saw it last year. It just looked so easy, but it's not. And that's the issue. You can try with all your might to be the best that you can be, and you probably will, but will it be enough?
Yeah, definitely. So it'd be quite something if he does sustain a title challenge against Verstappen after the year he had last year. And I think the Rosberg one is a good comparison.
So I'm personally not sure. So I don't know if challenging Max is necessarily the yardstick by which Red Bull measures Checo. It might well be what we would like to see as fans, but I'm not necessarily convinced that that's the expectation within Red Bull itself. And I think the proof in that will be it'll be interesting to see how close other teams can get. I think if it's a closer fight in the constructors, and we see Max running off into the distance, kind of as per, and Checo struggling to hold off a Ferrari, Mercedes, McLaren, Aston, whatever, it might be that conversation about Checo's future progresses much more quickly than was the case last year. He was helped out to some extent by quite how dominant and what a great job Red Bull and Adrian Newey and everybody did building that car last year, because it was so dominant. It didn't really matter too much how badly he qualified. He just swanned through the pack, and we saw that quite a few times. Sunday was the most important day for him every weekend, of course. And he came back and finished in the points pretty well, pretty regularly. The question will be whether or not that can be continued this year. I don't personally have any expectation for him to challenge Checo. I think to challenge Max. I think if anyone's going to challenge Max, it's probably going to be a couple of other names at other teams, most likely, if they can get a good package together. But yeah, Checo's yardstick will be almost everybody else, I think, this year, and it'll be fascinating to see how he deals with that. I'd love to see Checo challenge Max over the course of a season, but we've just seen it so many times over seasons past that it just can't seem to sustain it. Apart from at street circuits, where he's just an absolute freak and smashes it every time, but everywhere else he seems to struggle quite a bit against him. So yeah, I don't know if we should necessarily hold him to a title challenge, but I think certainly doing a really good job for Red Bull as the kind of second driver and sewing up a constructors comfortably again probably is the target they have for him, I think.
Yeah, definitely. If the field tightens with, like you say, Red Bull spent most of last year developing for this year, but if the field is just closed, they might need that second driver to help them win the constructors. I mean, let's move on to Mercedes, who finished second in the constructors. They had a pretty bad 2023, Sam, with no wins. What do you think a successful 2024 looks like? Is it simply having a car that they understand that is predictable but quick?
Yeah, well, we had a joke, didn't we, last week about the fact that they're describing the 2024 car, as much more drivable than the last one, and how that probably should be the bare minimum for a Formula One car for Lewis and George. I think they've got to be certainly winning Grand Prix, and they've got to be challenging in the constructors and in the drivers' championships, or at least be significantly closer than they were last year. I think they did pretty well to finish second. I mean, you and I talked a lot about Ferrari, and we'll come on to them in a bit. But they seem to close the gap and sort of figure out some of their issues late season, and certainly get the best out of Charles. So I think they're going to find it quite challenging, certainly with regards to those other two top teams. But yes, I think the absolute minimum expectation has to be winning races again and putting pressure on Red Bull at least. Whether or not they can sustain a title challenge is another question. They're coming from quite far back in terms of time, if not points, and points, as we saw last year. Well, Max could have won the constructors all on his own. There's a lot to do for them, I think, and I don't know that they tend to play down expectations, or they used to historically play down expectations, even when they were going through their dominant period. But the last couple of years, they've really tried hard to play down expectations, and it's sort of borne fruit at the start of each season, and the cars looked a real handful. Lewis was not happy for most of last year about a number of various issues he had with the car, and obviously he's now moving to Ferraris, which is a whole new dynamic, I think, for the team to manage. It's a big season for George. We talked a bit about this last week. It's a really big year for him to establish himself as, if not the number one this year, then definitely the number one going into 2025. It feels like there's a lot on the Mercedes plate, and I think getting back to winning, I think, has to be the absolute minimum expectation for them.
Yeah, definitely. And Alasdair, what's your take on Mercedes? Do you think they can get themselves further back up and they can recover from the last couple of years?
Yeah, I think we talk about that drivable quote, and I think another one that got chucked out, Toto Wolff quoting Anthony Davidson, who does sim duties for them, just saying it feels like a car again, which again is what you think was what you expect of their situation, but considering how the last 2 years have gone, they just got to show signs of progress, and it just being a bit more consistent, particularly with what we saw last year. James Allison being back, I think, is a big thing, and him being back in that position, and for the long term too. So it feels like they've got a long term pathway development wise anyway. But as Sam said, I think the George Russell question, if you like, is going to be one that shows itself throughout the season. He's got to show that he's the one who can take the team forwards after this year. I think a lot of the flashbacks, if you like, from last season are what happened to him in Singapore, crashing on that last lap. And that's almost like the overriding feeling on his 2023 season. So for him personally, he'll also want to bounce back from that. And if he has the machinery to do that, then that will help going forwards. But as I say, I don't think they have to be beating Red Bull. They just have to be closer to them and be far more consistent than the wildly inconsistent performances we saw last year.
Yeah. We did joke saying about how surprised we'd be if we saw a car with no side pods when it was launched the next couple of days. But I think yeah, it's a big year for George.
It would be a bold call if they did that.
It would. I mean, I think Twitter would go wild with no wonder Lewis has decided he's had enough if he's seen another car with no side pods again. Another one that's going to try and break his back. It's funny, so on Mercedes as well, I just think it's worth us reflecting that last year it wasn't necessarily just the pace or the challenges with the car kind of aerodynamically that we talked about. We also talked a lot about pit stops and setup through the weekend and free practices and stuff, and it felt like Mercedes made a mess of things sort of far more regularly than was the case sort of 5-6 years ago. So in terms of, I guess, their development this year, not just consistency on the track, but I think consistency off it probably is a big factor. And I'm sure Toto, he seems like the kind of person that takes that stuff very seriously. So I should imagine he'll be driving that home with the team. And yeah, I think there'll be kind of other off-track areas that they'll be looking for significant improvement this year.
Yeah, I think he's got a big year to sort of steady the team after the last couple, but also with Lewis going as well. I think a lot of people will be looking at him to lead them through these quite difficult times and to get I think one of the main tests of Toto is getting a good replacement for Lewis. I mean, we won't go into that now because that's a whole separate debate. But I think it should be a good one. Let's come on to Ferrari. Alasdair, they were the only team last year to beat Red Bull in a race. Do you think they can challenge for the title this year, or what are your sort of expectations from them for this year?
I feel like they're going to be up there, certainly race by race, toiling. We kind of saw that with their one lap pace in qualifying in 2023. And we've just talked about how Mercedes need to show consistency, but it kind of feels like that's what Ferrari did the second half of last year. So it just feels like they're
that's a good point.
One step ahead, if you like. The playful word is it's the Fredolution, but it kind of feels very much like that with what Vasseur is doing. Just partly as him as a manager and the presence that he has, and everyone seems to be on board with what he's trying to instill there. And we've already mentioned the Hamilton thing several times, but just knowing that he is on board for 2025, it feels like it's going to put a pep in their step. Going into this season, knowing what is to come, kind of feels like they're one of the teams with a lot of momentum going for them right now. And clearly, Lewis Hamilton has seen something positive that he likes the look of going forwards as well. So I think that's a bit of a significant indicator about where Ferrari are going relative to a lot of the other teams too. I don't think they'll be winning the championship ahead of Red Bull, but I think it's going to be a lot closer. And as you said, they were the only other team that actually won a race last year with Carlos Sainz, who was obviously his last year with the team this season. So again, we're talking about like driver dynamics, but if, say, it's a 2024 where Carlos Sainz outperforms Leclerc, what does that say about their driver calls and vice versa? And Carlos Sainz himself will be pretty motivated, I'm sure, to showcase to people what he's actually got, partly to secure himself the best possible drive after, but also kind of with a point to prove as well that he will believe in his own abilities and think that perhaps Ferrari should have stuck with him. But yeah, it is exciting to see where Ferrari are going from here, because it feels like the start of kind of that next evolution, if you like, in that team's history. and it going into a really, really special place. Perhaps not this year, but next year, the year after, it looks like it's on the right course.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think I like the Fred Revolution. I've not heard that, but that I think we're going to be using that a lot this year, and hopefully it's a positive one, because it'd be a real shame after sort of where they finished the season last year if they were to take a step backwards. You kind of want them to have a good 2024, so that they're in a really good place for next year as well. I think you're right to highlight the driver dynamic as well. I think you've got two drivers in very different sort of circumstances.
Yeah, I think that drive dynamic's fascinating. I think we did a bit of a preview right about before last season, and we looked at where we thought maybe we'd see a bit of spice between drivers, and Ferrari wasn't really one that we talked about, but I think this year it definitely could be. You've got, as you say, Sainz essentially auditioning for a drive next year now. Leclerc knowing he's got Lewis coming in 2025 and probably wanting to lay down a marker himself. And I think as well, Charles will be coming into this season feeling like he's got quite a lot to prove. He got 6 pole positions last year and didn't convert any of them into wins. Like, that will be something he's desperate to change, and Ferrari will be desperate to change as well. Like, that they've got to be looking at their Sunday pace and time management and all the kind of challenges they faced last year and trying to rectify those. And as I say, I think towards the back end of last year, it seemed like they started to bring that all together and put themselves in a position where they could certainly challenge for races again. So, yeah, I'm very excited for Ferrari this year. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I hope Charles can sort out his pole to win ratio, because it's not looking too healthy at the moment after a lot of poles that sort of came a bit out of nowhere, but then he kind of fell to nowhere in the race, really. Kind of, I think there was a couple of times where he wasn't even a contest for some of the wins after being on pole. Sam, McLaren finished 4th last year, but they were the surprise package with the development of their car and the turnaround in fortunes. What are you thinking for 2024 for them? They've obviously released their car already. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think progress probably. So I think they should be looking further up the championship rather than down and cementing themselves sort of top of the midfield. I think they should be looking to try and break into the top 3, and it's eminently possible that they do that. As you say, they developed the car really well last year, and they've got an absolutely dynamite driver lineup as well. And you and I both, in our preseason predictions, have both predicted that Lando Norris and/or Oscar Piastri will run a race this year. So we both clearly have high expectations for McLaren. But I think, looking to win races here and there, and certainly challenge some of the bigger teams regularly on the podium, and looking to cement probably 3rd place in the championship feels like a reasonable sort of expectation for them based on the sort of trajectory they're on at the moment. I don't think they're close to challenging for a championship, but they've got a couple of drivers that on their day I think could give Max a good run for his money. So you never know. If they put together a competitive package, and there'll probably be certain circuits that maybe they're a bit more competitive at than others, it's quite possible we see the odd Sunday where it's a McLaren challenging Max and a Red Bull rather than one of the others. But I think that's probably a reasonable expectation for them this year. I'm sure they'll be worried about Mercedes improving, Ferrari improving, Aston Martin improving. But yeah, they've been on such a good sort of run through the back end of last year. And I think we looked back at Norris's results, didn't we? And he had sort of, was he on the podium like 4 or 5 races in a row or something mad? Like, it's putting together those kind of runs again this year, and cementing themselves as a sort of top 3 team potentially should be the aim for them this year, I think. What do you guys think?
I mean, yeah, I'm the same. I mean, Alasdair, are you optimistic for their chances? Do you think they could both get a race win this year?
I'm very optimistic about McLaren, and I think we joked about it before. Obviously, I don't have favourite F1 drivers, but I love Oscar Piastri. I think he's brilliant. Hey! I got to interview him just before Vegas. Had a good hour chat with him, and his head is so screwed on, but he's just completely unflustered about anything. But the inner drivers there, don't confuse that for someone who's just very nonchalant about the whole business. He cares, but he's just so level-headed about it all. And I think that puts him in such a fantastic place going forward. So I think expect to see him make a real big step this year, particularly with a year of F1 under his belt now. But if you look at kind of the internal dynamics of McLaren and the hires that they've managed to make as well, and that kind of 3-pronged technical committee that they've got going on now, and they're all in place, whereas they weren't before last year. So I do see them challenging for race wins this season. I don't think it will be quite the consistency to be constructors champion challenging level, but I kind of almost see 2024 as like the stepping stone forwards to getting to that stage, because the way last year panned out with that upgrade and the performance trajectory that came after that, I think it's only going to go upwards in terms of their chances going forward. So maybe not this year, but 25, 26, particularly when new regulations come in, I'm very excited to see what McLaren do. And I think, as kind of Sam touched upon, if you were going to pick a driver pairing right now for a team that's going to challenge in the future, that's the driver pairing you pick.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it shows you that with Norris's contract extension, I think he said, I've seen something in the team that I want to repay the faith they've shown me and I want to be here for. So he's obviously knows that, it's only, like you say, the trajectory's only up. I mean, I'm a big fan of both of them. I think they really grew on me last year. I thought Piastri had a brilliant rookie season to come in and be that impressive. And I thought it sometimes had better weekends than Lando. And I think it'd be really fascinating if he, like you say, steps up another level this year, and he's, that battle between the two of them becomes a lot closer, because obviously Lando's been in the sport for quite a few years now and he's sort of been getting better and better. But it'd be quite something if his teammate starts to challenge him and sort of beat him regularly. I think that we might see a different side to Lando, so it should be quite fascinating.
Absolutely. And let's keep an eye on Oscar Piastri's continuing excellence on Twitter. By far and away the most fun driver to follow. And clearly the best thing McLaren could do for their chances is to ditch the papaya. We're all agreed on that, definitely.
I don't think Alice is allowed to have a view on that.
No. I'm not expecting a comment on that one.
I was going to say, I thought when you say about on Twitter, I thought you were going to say his mum is one of the best people on Twitter, because I know you're a big fan of.
She is also fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. Sam's a big Piastri fan. Let's move on to Aston Martin. They launched their car today in quite a similar sort of style to last year. Alasdair, we know that Lawrence Stroll, has big ambitions for the team. Do you think Aston Martin will get a step closer this season with Alonso and Stroll?
Yeah, like I say, the launch was today, so I'm full of Aston Martin content in my head anyway. Having read a lot, edited a lot of it today. I think is going to be another kind of step forward. Is again, Lawrence Stroll's put so much into that team, and the facility they now have at Silverstone is ridiculous. Like, it's if you're, like, say, building an F1 team from scratch, like, what they have is what you want. Like, there's no cut corners or anything like that. So
it's all brand new, isn't it?
Exactly, it's all brand new. I think Lawrence Barretto, our correspondent, was there, and just one building you see is like massive, and they have 3 of those, and there's like no expense spared, if you like, for what they want to do with that team. But I still think it's maybe a little bit too early to see the full results of that. But I do think there's going to be progress. I think Mike Crack today, in his kind of media interviews, was essentially saying, if we close the gap between us and the fastest cars, that's success for us. Whereas, interestingly, their tech chief, Dan Fallows, was way more bullish than Mike Crack was. And he was actively saying, like, we're viewing it as Red Bull are beatable, and that's what we're aiming for, which is probably exactly what Lawrence Stroll wants to hear. Those are the words they want to hear. But I think maybe take the Mike Crack level of, if they can at least show progress, then again, it's stepping stones to the right direction. But I think it's also quite nice that they're talking in those terms of actively targeting Red Bull, because it shows the ambition. And if you're not in it for first place, then a lot of people are probably going to be asking the question, was what's the point in the first place? Like, why are you ploughing all of this effort and resource if that's not the ambition? So I think it's healthy to see that. And again, you consider someone like Fernando Alonso, if he's going to stick at the team beyond this season, that's what he'll want to hear as well, if he is on that journey for the long term, to know that he is in that position where he can challenge. So again, it's another team that, it probably is because we're going in descending order in terms of the championship, but it feels like there's a lot of good stuff happening at that team, not just now, but more specifically in the future.
Did they have a shakedown today as well as the car launch? I didn't see.
They did.
They did. Nice.
Yeah.
It did look good. I know we'll probably cover liveries at some point. Certainly for some of the teams we've got coming up, but it's a good one this year. And this looks really good.
Yeah, it's a nice sort of refinement on last year's one. I mean, last year Aston, they started off so well and it kind of fell away a bit really with sort of developing the car in the wrong direction, then trying to regain that. But I suppose, like you say, keeping Alonso is probably one of the biggest priorities for them. And I don't know about you, but I found his comments quite interesting today, sort of saying, I'm the only world champion available to sign for next year on the grid, but still sort of wanting to be part of Aston Martin. I think he's an interesting character the best of times. And I think he'll be loving all this sort of drama and how he can sort of play off it. And I think he'll be judging Aston Martin quite closely, like you say, because he's not got many years left in Formula One. He'll want to make, if he's going to move one final time, he'll want to make sure it's the right one.
He did also say if he really feels like it, he could go till the age of 50 today, which would be quite something to see. But
that would be quite something.
Yeah, I don't think we're imminently going to be saying goodbye to Fernando Alonso in the next couple of years anyway. No,
especially for him, he'll be buoyed by the fact he's even in the conversation for a Mercedes seat at the age of 42. Like he'll be very happy about that. Definitely. Sam, what do you make of Lance Stroll's season? What do you think success looks like for him?
Oh, it's a big season for him. I think that largely because I think this is probably the year in which his seat is least safe. Now, that is obviously very funny for lots of people because he is the son of the owner of the team and therefore his seat's been safe for some time. But given the nature of the driver market and the availability of some really good drivers, I mean, we've already talked about Sainz, but there could be some others kicking around in the summer that are looking for a drive next year. And it feels to me like there's definitely an upgrade to be made there. And I think if Aston Martin are serious about building a package that can challenge for world championships in the next 2 to 3 years, they probably should be looking at upgrading at least one of their drivers. I mean, I think Fernando is still very, very good. He's still a fantastic option for them, but I think there probably could be an upgrade on Lance personally. I don't think he had a terrible season last year, but that being said, this season is a big one for him. I think he's got to close the gap to Alonso. He can't get beat, 23-0 in qualifying like he did last year. Like it's just not, if they're a serious team planning on challenging for stuff, that's just not sustainable. I think for him it's a really important year, and I think the start of the year is really important as well. Like by the time we get to the summer, silly season's in full flow. There's lots of driver chat moving around, and we've seen Aston Martin move quickly, like they did to get Alonso previously. And if Lawrence Stroll, see exactly, you go problem of one. If Lawrence Stroll spies an opportunity to get a fantastic driver in, you bet your bottom dollar he'll make it happen. He's that kind of character. So yeah, it's a big season for Lance, and particularly that first sort of 5 to 10 races, I think he needs to perform.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't caught any of his comments today, but Alasdair, what did Lance Stroll say at the launch? What was the noises he was making?
There was a lot of talk about him. Essentially, it's not like a revolution of his training regime, but he's really working on getting his training absolutely spot on. Obviously, he went into last season with the cycling accident beforehand, which I think maybe put him on the back burner a little bit. But I also think it was quite encouraging to see his performances at the back end, partly when Aston kind of sorted out the development issues that they were having in drawing them back. But I think Lance Stroll's final 2-3 performances were actually really encouraging. It's there. It's just that age-old word consistency again, and he just needs to find that ultimately. But I think again, it's a little bit like our Checo chat earlier. If he's doing that off-track work to really explore his full potential, then that bodes well for what's to come.
Yeah. I think the trailer, or the first teaser for Drive to Survive, came out today, and it looks like we might get some quite good behind-the-scenes access of Stroll and him recovering from his wrist injury. So, I mean, I think it'd be great for us fans to see that insight, see how his recovery went. But also, Lance Stroll's not really featured much in Drive to Survive in its 5 previous series. So, we've seen it do a world of good to some drivers' reputations. Let's hope it sort of shows a different side to him that we don't usually see in a race weekend, especially when there's so many other big personalities as well. I'm looking forward to that. It's only a couple of weeks to go until the latest season of Drive to Survive. So it should be a good one. Right, with that, we'll take a very quick pit stop. Welcome back from the break. Hope you had a jolly old time. So Sam, let's kick off the second half with the second half of the grid, and we're going to go with Alpine. So Sam, we know Alpine had a significantly different car this year to last year. Do you think it's a sort of make or break season for the French manufacturer and their drivers? You know, it's a big investment that they've got, and they've not sort of seen. They had a couple of podiums last year, but what are you sort of expecting for 2024 for them?
Yeah, it's funny you say make or break. When I knew I was going to get Alpine, make or break is the first note I've written down. So
really?
I think it is a really big year for them. Well, big year for Renault, I think, as the manufacturer for sure. They've got high hopes for the car. I mean, yeah, the list of things they've changed on it is unbelievable. Like the chassis, suspension, gearbox, brake management system, you name it, they've changed it. I think, was it, they jokingly said the only thing that's the same this year is the steering wheel, right? But they're blessed to have two very good drivers in Gasly and Ocon. And I think on their day, you know, in a relatively competitive car, they are quite tough to beat. They are really good. So yeah, it feels like not just a really big season for Renault, but a really big season for those drivers. And we've got the market question continuing, obviously through to the summer, silly season coming. They will both be certainly on some teams' lists in terms of considerations for drivers' spots. So a big season for them, and yeah, a massive season for Alpine and for Renault, because I don't necessarily think they've gone backwards, but they've been pretty stagnant now for a good couple of years, where before, you know, it's not that long ago that they were up there sort of challenging with Ferrari and teams like that for top 4 positions in the championship. Last year they were so far off it, and they made a bit of a meal of finishing 5th. So I think for them, you know, progress would be closing the gap to the top teams. I don't think they're going to get anywhere close necessarily to those teams. I don't see them finishing above sort of Aston, Ferrari, Mercedes, or Red Bull. But if they can get a bit closer and sort of cement themselves firmly in the midfield and look, you know, at least look like they've done, you know, they've made some progress and closed the gap a bit, I think that will probably be enough from a Renault perspective. But I don't know, it feels different this year. Like it looks like with the launch, it just looked like it just felt a bit more serious. I remember looking at it last year, looking at the whole car launch stuff, and it was, you know, I get the spectacle and the rest of it, but they are a Formula One team, and performance is the key sort of parameter that's going to sort of define their season. And this year, it looked like a much more serious launch, like they meant business. So, yeah, I'm kind of hopeful they can close the gap. But I think knowing what we know about the teams they're trying to chase down, I think it's a hard ask that they're going to sort of push them for any further honours in the championship than 5th, really. But that would still be progress, I think, if they can close the gap. What do you guys think about Alpine? They're kind of a funny team, aren't they? Really, like they're so midfield. It's like it's scary. They're in no danger of finishing last. They're definitely in no danger of winning the constructors. They're right in the middle, and it's just a kind of, there's like a very small space, I suppose, that they could move up or down season on season.
It's from my perspective, obviously what happened last year with them. I almost think like the biggest thing in 2024 for them is just stability. You look at, obviously, Otmar Zafnauer leaving, Alan Permain leaving, what happened with Lauren Rossi, like the names go off with people leaving their roles, moving roles, you name it, last year. And I think just a good start is now they finally got Bruno Famin confirmed as team principal for the long term, no longer interim, and just getting a settled team behind the scenes, I think, is going to be a large part of where they go from here, because they've got so many brilliant foundations. You look at the star backers that they now have. Obviously, we all get, you know, starry-eyed at celebs and everything like that. But when you can like call upon the likes of Ryan Reynolds from the Hollywood world, but also Trent Alexander-Arnold, Patrick Mahomes saying this the day after Super Bowl, Travis Kelce, Rory McIlroy, Anthony Joshua, like the list is ridiculous in terms of backers that they have. So like the finance is there, like all the off-track stuff, the routes, if you like, is there. They just got to use it now. And again, working on the Alpine launch, I think that was a large part of the narrative, if you like, that they were putting out, as just show those 1% improvements across the board in every little department, and that's what's going to take them forwards this year. And Sam touched on like the launch events. The launch event this year versus last year was obviously far more low key, but I think that's also partly by design, in that it's a lot more about the car now and realizing we've actually got to deliver some performance rather than everything else that goes with it. So the aim is there, the ambition is there, the support is there. It's just going to be the start of a long-term journey again. Because if you remember we want to be whatever it was winning in the 100 races.
The
phrase
100
from
race
before.
plan.
Yeah,
and
the
then
100
500
race
races.
plan, which I feel like if we haven't already passed the 100 races, we're getting there. So it feels like it's the start of another attempt at that, if you like. And as Sam mentioned, there's unfortunately for them, it feels like there's 5 teams who are ahead of them in that pathway right now, no matter how good 2024 might be.
Yeah. I think for Alpine, they've got to, like I say, make progress this year and make progress the next year, and then they've just got to hope that when the regulations change in 2026, they can spring a surprise on the others and move up there, because that's probably their only opportunity to make a real dent in climbing up. And you never know what Renault and Alpine, the same thing. What they're going to do with the team if it continues to stay at this level. You never know if they could try and sell the whole thing off or wash their hands of it. It's a tricky one, really.
Yeah, and to quickly mention the driver pairing situation, and both of them are out of contract at the end of this year. Not saying this again just purely because the top story right now on F1.com is about those two and what are they going to do. But Alpine have been in the position where they've lost Oscar Piastri, they've lost Fernando Alonso. They don't really want to be in a position again where they're kind of starting from scratch, because theoretically they could be in a position where they do have a completely different lineup next year. And that's not really the ideal situation. So showing to those two, Gasly and Ocon, that they have something that's worth sticking around for the long term, I think is just as important, really, as everything else, and making sure that you've got at least one of those locked down relatively soon.
I saw Ocon at the launch was making comments about, I've got a relationship with Mercedes, and trying to get himself in the conversation. I mean, I think we'll all be pretty shocked if he's the number 2 at Mercedes next season. But I agree with you. I'm actually going to go and read that after this is read the article, because I'm intrigued to see where they go, because what are their options really for Gasly and for Ocon? There aren't many seats further up the grid you could see them in, really. Especially if you've got Sainz. If your Sainz doesn't go to Mercedes, and Sainz is a big, and Sainz is a big player on the market, going to somewhere like Stake when it becomes Audi, that's a big contender for a big seat. I think they're going to be 2 ones to watch. I mean, and also they see, considering they used to be best friends with their children, they kind of fell out and then were put as teammates. They seem to get on relatively well. I don't remember too many clashes last year, so it'd be interesting if they can maintain sort of a healthy relationship. I mean, was it Australia when they took each other out by accident?
Yep.
It'd be intriguing to see what happens this year if they can maintain sort of a healthy teammate bromance relationship on track, because there's nothing worse when teammates take each other out and unnecessarily lose points. And we've seen Ocon's kind of got that in his locker from his clashes with Perez in the past,
and Alonso.
Yeah.
Any comment on the livery for Alpine? Are we doing that on this podcast? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I mean, they've put some more black into it, which I think actually looks quite nice, and I do quite like the mixture of the blue and the pink, and then obviously the 2 separate liveries for, I think it's 8 races it's pink, and the rest it's more blue. I do like it, but it's just the rest of the grid is so black heavy because they're all trying to save weight. It's kind of a bit of a shame, really, especially when you think, when they were fully pink or fully blue, they looked much better. But yeah, Alasdair, what's your thoughts on livery? Are you a fan?
Yeah, I mean, considering some of the liveries I have seen, and I think I'm still seeing the Sauber one in kind of, it's like that glow in the dark in my bedroom at all times. I should see it in my mind all the time. But I'd say I'm on board with the blue and pink, but I think similar with everybody else. If that paint job, the lack of paint job, grants them extra performance, who knows how much, but you'd probably take less paint if it gave you a better chance of stronger performances, I suppose.
Yeah.
As much as we all like to be design gurus.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like they need to find a way to bring colour back into one, because there are quite a lot of similar looking like black heavy cars, and that's kind of a bit of a shame for where it was. But anyway, that's a separate thing. A car that I think looks very nice is the Williams. I think it's a really nice refinement on last year's livery. It's a good sort of development, and also what's really encouraging, more sponsors. That car is getting filled up every year. Maybe one day it'll be as filled as the McLaren, which seems to run out of space of sponsors. Alasdair, many fans were delighted to see Williams make great progress under James Vowles and Alex Albon last year. What are you expecting for 2024 for them?
More steady progress, quite simply. I don't think as much as we'd like to get carried away with that storyline and like the re-emergence of Williams, particularly since if you consider where they've been for the last few seasons. But again, if they just show steady progress, I wouldn't really expect them to jump up the table or anything like that. And James Vowles, he speaks so well on it, but he has maintained every single time this is a long-term journey. This is not going to be an overnight, suddenly instant hit performances. Again, as much as we'd like to see that, but a lot of what he's doing right now is just putting those foundations in place for the long term. If you look at the hire of Pat Fry, who was at Alpine last season and then left at the same time that Zafnauer and Alan Permain left, and having him installed as Williams' chief technical officer, that's very much a great hire, but a great hire for the future. You know, it's going to have benefits now, of course, but that is very much with future seasons in mind and getting the team into becoming a winning machine again. I think that's a similar phrase to what Pat Fry used, in that he just wants to build a winning team, but that will take time. But in Alex Albon, they've got someone who is probably at the peak of his powers right now in terms of his F1 career. Certainly being lauded more than he ever has done before, because you look at what he did last year with scoring 27 out of the 28 points that they did eventually get. And you look at the machinery that he had versus a lot of the others, like there was some real stellar performances in there. The Canada one in particular springs to mind that I think Vowles called like a championship winning drive.
Yeah.
It's just, again, we go back to driver market, and the ultimate question is, Williams want Alex Albon for the long term. They'd love to have him as their team leader for the long term, but it's whether he has the time for that. And if an option comes up at a team who are ready to challenge, then there is every chance he takes that jump. And Williams this season, as well as making progress, it's almost as much showcasing to someone like Alex Albon that they've got what it takes later down the line to deliver what he wants, which is ultimately to be in a championship contending car.
Yeah. I think Albon, keeping him is crucial for them, because you know he's been linked to. There's rumours flying around on Twitter. I'm not sure if I believe them. You know, they're obviously Twitter, so you've got to take everything with a pinch of salt. But they're sort of saying that Red Bull want a first option on him, which you know you could see him going off and going there. But also, you know, Mercedes. When we did our emergency podcast, Hamilton, we said he'd be a very attractive option there as well, just for his temperament and his style. But if he does go, you know, that means this season is even more crucial for Logan Sargent, who needs to have a real step, I think, because otherwise, if Albon goes and Sargent doesn't impress or improve, you're then looking at bringing two new drivers for next season, which is not ideal, really, especially with the money and time they've committed to Sargent. Sam, what do you think? Sargent's going to have a big 2024? Do you think he's going to make a step up?
I hope so. I do hope so. That's a kind of nothing answer, isn't it? Really, I don't want to say no. I really don't. But it's hard. Yeah, he's got a really good teammate. I think there were kind of intricacies with the car last year that I think Sargent really struggled with. But it seemed like he was getting slightly better, like more on top of them towards the end of the year. So I think if the development sort of pathway that they've taken continues on that train, then there's every chance Logan Sargent can close the gap a bit more and maybe pick up a few more points than he did last year. It's funny, it's almost like lots of teams have been trying to sort of unlock the same or sort of solve the same challenges with regards kind of too much rear end grip, understeer through the slow corners. And Williams were a team that really struggled with that last year along with Alpine, and both teams look like they're trying to address that through their launches this year. that could be quite big for Sargent, I think, if they have managed to sort of rectify those issues. And what we should see from Williams also is that they're a bit more consistent on some of the circuits that they really struggled at last year. Like, they were a really good low drag, kind of high power circuit team last year. Apart from that one really weird outlier in Hungary, where they somehow managed to like get the car into the top six, and everyone had predicted them to finish sort of 16th, 17th going into that weekend. But apart from that, they really struggled on some of those circuits. So I think consistency is the name of the game, and I think from Sargent's perspective, in the same way, I don't think Checo's expectation should be to beat Max. I don't think Sargent should be to beat Albon, but I think maybe a bigger contribution would be probably enough for him this year.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with that. The word you said there is consistency. That's what it ultimately comes down to. And it is similar to Checo in some ways, where AlphaTauri were only 3 points behind them in the championship last year, ultimately. So you need your second driver to score points, quite simply, if you do want to make that progress. James Vowles did a very good job of protecting him, quite rightly, because he wasn't as experienced, and he didn't have that mileage in an F1 car like some of the others did. So I think it's great that he's got another shot to really show what he can do, because it's one of those where it feels like it's all there. It's just almost like a battle of the mind to like find that consistency time and time again. So there's a driver there, and I'd be very excited to see what he can do. Look at his Vegas qualifying, for example. I think he was in Q3, and the talent is there. She's got to find the consistency.
Yeah, James. I think that's a really good point about James Vowles. He made two, I think, really interesting comments, like you said last year. One was like, the young drivers coming into Formula 1 this year, as a rookie, they get such little time to test an F1 car. So he was turning up to races, sometimes to circuits he'd never been before, trying to figure out the circuit, figure out the car, and put it all together in a very limited time. And so I think that must have been like a very hard learning curve as well. And he also made the thing like there was lots of weekends where Sargent would be going like flat out, really pushing it, and like almost pushing it too much too soon. And that was kind of like that kind of like he didn't have that ability yet to sort of manage it and when to know when to push and when to not. And then there was a couple of times where he did crash the car, and that was just him probably just really pushing it rather than because of like silly errors. I think he was just trying to do that. So yeah, I'm intrigued to see how he's going. And I saw he said he's put on 5 kg, I think, because he's just found he was so wiped out at the end of the season. So hopefully that helps him with his sort of managing the car and managing races. But I think he'll be one to watch, and I'm really excited to see what James Vowles does in his second full season. I think we would sort of talk about him in the break, and Alasdair, you made a good point about this is only his second season as a team principal. You think he's been there much longer, so yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what he does. We should talk about AlphaTauri, who are now VCARB, who are now RB, which stands for Racing Bulls, which is definitely not confusing with the other team called RB, who also happens to be, the bigger sister of this team. I actually found out recently that Visa and Cash App are two separate sponsors. I thought they were one. That blew my mind. They've launched their car. They've rebranded as a company as well from AlphaTauri. There's lots of similarities with the RB19. Obviously, some of the aero is not the same. Sam, we've got two drivers in Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo that are trying to get themselves in the conversation and be in the race to get into the main team for next season. What can we expect from them this year?
Yeah, I think I'm really excited to see how Yuki and Daniel get on this year. I think they're both sort of auditioning for that Red Bull seat potentially, if Checo were to lose it at some point in the next 12 months. And that makes their duel all the more interesting, I suppose. And we also saw Liam Lawson come in and do a really good job last year. So it's quite a competitive sort of group, as you would expect from the Red Bull driving program. It's an extremely competitive sort of field that they're fighting in. But I think it's going to be particularly interesting this year because, as you say, the cars share so many similarities with the RB19. I mean, people call it the RB19.2 and the rest of it. It's not quite that similar, but it is very similar. Like the kind of side pods look very remarkably similar to the RB19 and the front suspension in particular. So they'll have that nice anti-stall mechanical grip that Red Bull enjoyed so much of last year. And I think if there's ever a car that you want to sort of test your drivers in to see if they're up to the mark, it's why not put them in the car that you built last year? So for Red Bull, it's ideal. I think you've got two drivers there duking it out over the course of a year. And I think particularly for sort of Alpine and Williams, if there's one team I'd be worried about overtaking them this year, it's probably Red Bull B, as I'm calling them. Until the lawyers turn up, I'm calling them Red Bull B for the moment. So yeah, I'm sort of intrigued to see how they perform, and I think as well, given the similarities to the RB19, it also provides quite an interesting yardstick to see what other teams have done and how much progress they've made this year. So yeah, just all around quite an interesting sort of move. It's also very contentious. I'm conscious that like politically it could be quite an interesting year for them. I'm sure Zach Brown will be standing on the soapbox every weekend complaining about this as much as anyone will listen, and I'm sure other teams will jump into the mix as well. So yeah, it could be quite a kind of politically interesting year for them. They've moved quite a bit of like their operations to Milton Keynes as well for that closer synergy with Red Bull, which again has been really contentious. Yeah, it's just going to be a fascinating year for that team, I think. And just to comment on their livery, I think their livery looks great. I mean, I'm not sold on the name or anything like it, hence Red Bull B, but their livery looks banging, so I'm happy with that. But yeah, I think upper midfield, potentially looking to overtake Williams and Alpine feels like a potential sort of yardstick for them. And yeah, they've got a couple of good drivers there, and I'm fascinated to see how Daniel gets on, because it feels like so long that we've seen. So it's been so long since we've seen him at the top of his game. I'm sort of desperate to see it again and see that big smile come back. And equally, Yuki is a driver that's been in the sport a long time now. I don't want to say it's a make or break season for him, but he needs to beat Ricciardo this year, probably pretty well. And yeah, really demonstrate his value to the Red Bull organization and get himself into that conversation for the Red Bull seat over the next couple of years. So yeah, there's an awful lot of of all the teams and kind of narrative alongside the sort of Mercedes, Ferrari, Hamilton shenanigans that we'll be keeping an eye on. This feels like the other area where there's quite a lot of potential for all kinds of tomfoolery. So yeah, looking forward to seeing how they get on.
Yeah, I mean, with Daniel, it'd be interesting to see if we get the Mexico Daniel that turned up, that put the car, was it like really high up on the grid and just had a really good Sunday as well. Obviously, with the breaking his wrist, kind of disrupted that as well. And for me, I think for those two drivers, if one beats the other by a convincing margin, it's kind of curtains for them really, because if Ricciardo absolutely smashes Yuki, I think that's probably the end of his time in the Red Bull sort of system. I think he's been growing and he's been developing, and a common thing we've talked about, he seems to be getting more and more consistent, and he's kind of ironing out the errors. But then if Yuki absolutely wipes the floor with Daniel, then that ruins Daniel's chances of getting into the Red Bull team, which I think is obviously probably his main aim, I think, for this year, is to have a really strong year to get himself in that conversation. I think that's gonna be a fascinating one to watch. I mean, Alasdair, are you a fan of the livery, and what do you make of RB's chances for 2024?
Yeah, it's very I think 2018-esque, that era Toro Rosso kind of vibes, that livery.
Mm-hmm.
So
Brendan Hartley,
exactly. We love a throwback as much as anybody. Weird to think 2018 is a throwback, but hey ho. From their launch, the main phrase that kind of was a standout for me was that we're building a new team. And you look at the people who are there now, be it Laura Meckes as team principal, Peter Bayer as CEO. I mentioned Alan Permain leaving Alpine. He's joined them now. And traditionally, that team has kind of been the one where your young Red Bull drivers go before they get their promotion to the main team. It's not going to be that anymore. The aim is far more ambitious in that they actually want to be like, I know Franz Tost had always mentioned about trying to get fifth in that constructors as like a big goal for him that he never quite managed before he retired. But it's that, if not more, for the squad now. So there's a lot of big noises coming out of the team about, obviously there's that closer alignment to Red Bull, but it's with that in mind. And you kind of look at their driver lineup now in that it's a very experienced Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda, who's going into his fourth year now, as a sign that maybe that is shifting and it's not quite for the young'uns anymore, if you want to phrase it that way. And like I say, there's going to be so much intrigue in that driver pairing with the whole Checo conversation we obviously had earlier, and Liam Lawson, because he arguably part of the reasons we're having as many conversations about Logan Sargent and for him finding consistency is because Liam Lawson hopped in a car for 5 races and scored 2 points. And there's a lot of big hopes for, I think, what he's going to do in the future. And I know we mentioned about, if Daniel Ricciardo outscores Yuki or vice versa, Liam Lawson's waiting in the wings to take a seat at some point. He's not going to be hanging out there for too much longer. So yeah, exciting to see what happens on the driver front. And I will also, I suppose, quickly mention, obviously, Yuki did perform very well. I think he, in terms of head-to-heads, outscored all three of his teammates from last season. And Honda have obviously are big backers of him. And I think it's been mentioned a couple of times. Obviously, Honda are teaming up with Aston from 2026. So I wouldn't be surprised if that ended up being an option for Yuki if, say, Ricciardo, as many people seem to think, is the next favourite, if you like, to take that Red Bull seat.
Yeah, I've heard that rumour as well about Yuki going off with Honda and sort of being a very attractive prospect for them being with Aston. But I can't. It's then becomes, like you say, it's about not to go back to Aston, but how do you get Yuki in and still keep it Alonso and still keep the onus on as well? I mean, it's interesting. It seems to me with RB that with a closer alignment to Red Bull, they obviously want to get more for their money, right? They obviously want it to get more points, more prize money, but for less, because they're trying to, they're, like I say, moving people across, moving functions across to Milton Keynes. They have their own building, I think, in the Milton Keynes complex. So obviously wanting to sort of reduce the cost but maximize it as well. I mean, we know there is one Mr. Andretti that is very keen to get into F1. I sometimes look at that. I sort of see what they're doing. I almost wonder: is there just an opportunity there for them to sell the team off to someone that will pay a lot of money for a Formula One entry if his entry doesn't, if he can't get into the sport, even was it 2028? I think is what was sort of said back to him. But yeah, I mean that's just me speculating. But it will be interesting to see how the rebrand, and like you say, it's no longer the training ground for the young'uns. It's very much we're here to compete and we're here to get more points and test out these two drivers. And fair play, they've got that option to do that with this team. But I think, like you said, Sam, I think there's a real risk with politically. It just seems a little bit misjudged with Zach Brown being very, very vocal, and I think that could gain more momentum if they massively shoot up and leave the teams behind them, by a long distance, by that closer alignment.
Yep, interesting one to keep an eye on that one.
Yeah. Let's move on to Kick Sauber. They've had a very bold rebrand with their new sponsors, and they've gone for a lovely bright green and black. It's sort of a rebrand for while we wait for Audi to join. 2023 was largely forgettable. I don't think we covered Bottas at all on this podcast because he kind of passed us by a bit. Didn't really have much to talk about. How do you think their 2024 will go?
It has to go better than last year, quite simply. It was only 16 points last year that they scored. That's 4 more than Haas for last year. So they are very open about the fact that 2023 was bitterly disappointing as they waved goodbye to Alpha as their sponsor. And so, yeah, it's kind of they're very much gearing into new era. Obviously, there's the livery, which has understandably gotten plenty of attention following that launch. But if you're looking at the performance side of it, James Key is obviously now in too as the technical director, someone that Andreas Seidel, who's the CEO of the team, backs very heavily from their time at McLaren and was very keen to bring him in. And he was a big part of that launch too, kind of describing how the car has changed, and similar to a lot of teams kind of going down that Red Bull-esque design, if you like, and going forwards in that way. So there's, again, it's a large part of it is just showing that they're building that momentum for Audi, because the Audi is the big kind of thing that they're all geared up for in 2026. And they need to show that they're kind of holding up their end of the bargain in terms of designing the chassis and getting the car right, while Audi deliver on their power unit, if you like. So they've got to show that they are heading in the right trajectory. And then again, you look at the kind of the driver partnership situation again, and you mentioned not mentioning Bottas too much from last year. His mullet got plenty of attention, and his calendar did, but likewise, his racing less so. And he's someone has always talked about kind of being on that journey for the long term with that Audi project in mind. But if he's not seeing it, then why wouldn't you look somewhere else? I think he said before that, yes, it's his first priority, but there's no team he wouldn't go to right now. And Joe, I think, is a similar situation where he's just got to show another step up this season. He's done enough so far for them to give him another extension, but Audi will probably want some big hitters when they actually come into the sport too. So it's almost as much the team proving themselves to Audi, but also the drivers kind of proving themselves to Audi as well. It's kind of the lingering project in the background throughout all of this, really.
Yeah, I'd probably put those two as probably the two least safe in their seats for next year. I think if you're got Audi coming in, there's an opportunity with so much change this year to get some bigger hitters in. I think they've got to have a good year, and like I say, they've both got to step on and develop and show that they're worth keeping around, not just for another year, but until Audi turn up.
And until Sebastian Vettel comes back, of course, Will.
You're very excited by that Vettel's getting back. I mean, I'm not sure. I think his days in F1 are done. I think he's happy looking after his bees.
Yeah, as fun as it would be. I think the names I have heard crop up are Ocon for Audi in the future. Sainz, obviously, partly, obviously he was without a seat at the end of this year, but the relationship Audi has with his dad and what he did at the Dakar Rally. And I think also saw that Gasly is linked to potentially Audi in the future too. So there are plenty of options out there.
And you think if you compare those to the two they've currently got, you'd pick them over pick those over them. I think most F1 fans would agree with that. Now let's come on to our final team, Haas. Sam, Gunter is gone.
Oh, no.
It's time for Gene Haas to show he means business. He says he's going to back the team more, and he's fed up of coming last. They've already had their car launch, and they did say, "Yep, we've got this wrong, and we're going to be spending a few races kind of get back on track." Do you think they can improve on last, or do you think they're going to have another sort of miserable year at the back and finishing last?
So, sadly, I don't just think it could be a miserable year at the back. I think it could be a miserable year at the back where they're even further behind the teams right ahead of them than they were last year.
Really?
Yeah, because like there were some races last year where they qualified relatively well. Their race pace really suffered, and it may well be that like they've solved some of those problems. But as you say, the noises coming out of that team already since the launch they're not particularly inspiring. And they made a big deal about a couple of big upgrades they had last year. I thought they bought one to Austin, didn't they, as well?
Yeah.
And it really didn't do much for them at all, which isn't really a great barometer for progress. And yeah, as we've talked about some of those other teams, I feel like it feels much more likely they're going to make progress and close up to the rest of the pack than Haas will. So if anything, I think, yeah, it could be a season where Haas are even further back than they were before. I don't particularly like that, but I just think that's the reality. And yeah, you talked about Andretti, and who knows? I know there's a distinct rivalry there, and it feels incredibly unlikely, but money talks, right? It could happen. Maybe Gene will decide he's had enough of Formula One at some point. But yeah, I think it's going to be another tough year for them, another tough year for their drivers. I'm kind of interested to see how the battle between Hülkenberg and Magnussen goes, actually, because I wasn't really expecting Hülkenberg to outperform Magnussen for as much of last year as he did. So yeah, I'm kind of intrigued to see if that continues this year. But I think, unfortunately, it will probably continue right at the back of the grid again.
Yeah. I mean, Alasdair, how sad are you to see Gunter is gone? And do you think there's going to be a revival?
I mean, in terms of headline writing, no Gunther. It's a loss to, I think, a lot of us in terms of like the stories and the quotes he would just give you, and just being a character in the sport. And I wrote the team preview for Haas for the website the other day, and I think I put their one key goal for 2024 is just move on from Gunther. take performance away from it, just kind of leave that shadow, because he's been there for so long and been such a prominent character. And the new team principal, Aya Komatsu, that's just what he's going to get asked so often, that lingering presence. And I think in his first media interviews that he did, is like one of the key things he said is, I'm not trying to be Gunther, I'm trying to be my own man, so to speak. So yeah, in terms of performance, I think when your team principal is saying, yeah, we're going to be towards the back, if not last, in Bahrain, I think you can pretty much take that as a given, that that's what's going to happen. And you consider all the other teams that we've talked about tonight, and every single one of them has either got their background teams in place and have been for a while, or they've put them in place and they're now starting to see the fruits of that. Haas aren't there yet. They're still getting about putting all those structures in place, and Komatsu's the first part in that, and there's going to be a lot more recruitments, cogs that will have to get put in before you start seeing what that progress is going to be. So I don't think this season's going to be that. But like Sam said, interesting to see what the driver dynamic will be. I think, if memory serves me right, Hülkenberg was something weird, like he was the 8th best qualifier last year, which, considering the car he had, shows how different it was and how much they struggled on race day versus qualifying, but also showed what a great year he had. So he might be one who's potentially looking elsewhere. They're another driver pairing you out of contract at the end of the year. So it will be interesting to see, but in terms of results, I don't think you're going to expect to see Haas anywhere near the points paying positions all that often.
Yeah. I mean, Gene Haas has said he's going to take it more seriously. He's fed up of being last. Maybe, like you say, this year is the year they make some more hires and they put those structures in place, but also he decides to put, more investment into the actual team. And I think that's something that Gunther said in an interview since leaving, that he wanted to invest in the team and Gene didn't. And it'll be interesting to see if the approach to how they fund and run the team changes at all with Gene sort of saying he's fed up of being last. Yeah,
and I think there's also, again, if memory serves me right, the Austin upgrade that we mentioned, Gene paid for that, essentially. He helped bankroll that, and it didn't work. And I think from his side, I think there's wanting to see that return on the investment. I mean, we're talking about Lawrence Stroll, and it's a similar thing. I think he wants to see the return on the investment he's making into that team. Similar kind of vibes. But he might just have to be a bit patient on that.
Very good. So there we go. All 10 teams, all previewed. It's going to be an absolutely fascinating season. I can't wait. We're not far off from preseason testing, and I think it's it's going to be so interesting to see how the pecking order establishes and see who moves up and who moves down. And it's not long till lights out in Bahrain.
Yeah, was it 9 days till preseason testing starts?
21st of February.
Yeah, exciting.
And honestly, you're flying out for preseason testing.
I'll be flying out to Bahrain on the 20th. So,
wow,
yeah,
excellent.
That's quite a way to take in the start of the season.
Yeah, exactly. And see what the vibes are like as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for joining us, Alasdair. It's been a pleasure. And thank you, listener, for joining us again this week. Remember to subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you enjoyed it, why don't you share it with a friend? Hopefully they will enjoy it more than we're going to enjoy trying to pick out the cars during the night races this season. Follow us on Twitter at WPoiser and at LightsOutSam, and on Instagram we are at the LightsOutPod.
That's all from us. All the best and goodbye.
Bye-bye.